Welcome to the Golden Hour, the podcast community where moms and moms-to-be hear stories from other mothers and top experts in the pregnancy and postpartum care field. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. You can also find us at goldenhour.fm on Instagram for comments and questions. Welcome to today's episode of The Golden Hour. I'm your host, Dr. O, and I am joined by Abbe Feder. When Abbe emerged from the other side of her own infertility battle, she founded InCircle Fertility to hold the hearts and hands of those struggling to build their families. She bridges the gaps between the clinic, doctor, patient, and therapist experiences and knew there was a niche to provide support for someone who's been there, literally everywhere. Abbe has a background in behavioral science and is a certified life coach. She is also the host of her own podcast, Women's Wellness with Abbe Feder. She is an avid mahjong and card player and escape room enthusiast. Abbe is married to filmmaker Isaac Feder. They are the true Hollywood cliche, and they live in Los Angeles. They're miracle twins. Welcome, Abbe.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
I'm so excited. I think when we were chatting before starting to record, you kind of alluded to how valuable it is to grow this network of people who are passionate about women's health and maternity care. And so selfishly, as this podcast has continued on, I feel so grateful for making connections with people like you. So I'm just so excited to have our conversation today.
And I feel exactly the same way. And we were introduced by our dear colleague, Molly.
Yes.
Who's also a wonderful champion for really perinatal but postpartum women's health. And I think continuing to amplify each of our voices is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, it's so inspiring because I think when I started this podcast, it really was an inception of my own frustration as an OBGYN who up until this point had spent, 9 to 5 every day of the week in these rooms, having these intimate, intense moments with each patient, each client, each family. And from those frustrations, feeling like our healthcare system can support women and birthers and families so much better. And so as I've stepped out of my little microcosm of my clinic space and have been introduced to so many other people in this same space, so many other people who are just as passionate and kind of focused on empowering birthers and women, it helps to remind me that I'm not alone. It restores my faith in the system. So I'm grateful for Molly connecting me to you. And I'm so grateful for you and the conversation we're about to have.
Same.
Well, let's take it all the way back, Abbe. As I alluded to in your intro, you kind of had your own fertility journey that's inspired so much of the powerful work that you do now. Do you mind giving us kind of background of
Absolutely.
Your start to finish, if you will?
Yeah, my start to finish was extremely long. And it was really 6 years from start to finish. It wasn't all medicated treatment during that time. The first couple years was a lot of denial that anything was wrong or that we would need help. We were very healthy individuals. We had no diagnosis. We had what's called unexplained infertility. Some doctors don't fully believe that unexplained infertility is real. Whether they believe it or not, we never came up with anything that was causing our infertility. And we kept saying, this is not going to be our story. And we had friends that were going through fertility treatment and we were like, oh, thank God that's not going to be us. Until it is. And it's very alarming and jarring. And you know this better than anyone. We are not given all of the tools and education that we need as far as sex ed goes. I really think that I'm like heterosexual, cisgender, present white. Like I have every possible benefit I could have. And there was so much I had no clue about until I was in the trenches. Sure, we understand theoretically that we get our period once a month and we ovulate once a month. I did not understand how short the window was to be able to achieve pregnancy and all that needs to line up miraculously for the pregnancy to grow into an actual living child.
Yeah.
And so I just was in a lot of disbelief and denial in the beginning until finally, after several rounds of what's called IUI, intrauterine insemination, which is sort of the gateway drug into fertility treatment, we did IVF. And again, uneducated in terms of IVF because I thought once you do IVF, you get your baby, no problem. And we did not have success on our first round of IVF, nor our second. And this continued on and on for several years. And ultimately it was our 8th transfer that brought me to my twins. And along the way, multiple failed cycles, multiple losses. I had to do a termination for medical reasons. But I did get my happy ending, which for me was my twins. And I feel extremely lucky. And just, I think like so many of us in the birthing world, we go through something and we say, there has to be a better way to go through this. And so that is why InCircle Fertility, which is my business, was created. And even my podcast, Women's Wellness with Abbe Feder, much like you, I just want people to have the tools they need. And so much of that is gained from storytelling and hearing other people's stories, seeing other people just like you, just like me, who've gone through some form of trauma or hardship that we never thought we'd go through, and realizing there's nothing wrong with it. We just have to educate ourselves and get through it the best that we possibly can.
Abbe, what a journey. And I know that you gave us like high little tidbits. I can only imagine what that experience was for you and your partner and probably those who lifted you up along those years, because, you know, every failed transfer, every period that you didn't want, every, you know, unexpected need to terminate a pregnancy, all of those things were, you know,
huge.
They were huge. And I can imagine them, not to use like a violent analogy, but I can imagine them as like physical and emotional blows, right? I think about this so much because, you know, it's truly a privilege for me to sit in a space, again, one-on-one with patients so intimately. And I remember all those kind of conversations I have with patients, that very first appointment where they're meeting me for a preconception consultation is what we call it. We're really just trying to provide education, because you're right. Our healthcare system is broken. Let's not even start with our education system. And so, you know, you're just trying to tell people the basics, and even the basic of understanding, oh yeah, you know, patients sometimes will come to me and say, we're not pregnant yet. Why isn't it working? We haven't used birth control in several, you know, months or years. I'm like, oh, okay, well, how are you timing it? And their mind is blown, because like, timed intercourse, what is that? And you just realize even the basics of understanding kind of starts at that first appointment.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's ways to be empowered outside of that space. Again, so, you know, what you're doing in your space with your podcast, what I'm hoping to achieve with this podcast is really empowering people with that education early on. So you don't find yourself, you know, struggling or frustrated, you know, months or years later. Through your process, who and what were the people that lifted you up and brought you through, again, such a long fertility journey?
Yeah, I will be very honest. It was hard to find people to lift me up, and I don't blame them. I think so much of this being shrouded in secrecy at that time resulted in lack of support, because people didn't know what to do, what to say, much like anything that feels triggering or hard to talk about or sensitive, we tend to avoid talking about it. And so I felt abandoned by so many people, because I felt like, look, in the beginning, we wanted to keep it a secret that we were doing treatment. We never really felt shame about it. It was more that we wanted to have that authentic surprise of being like, we're pregnant. And once it was clear that that was really not going to happen, we started telling a few people slowly, close family, close friends, and they would feel horrible and say the right thing maybe in that moment, and then never check in about it again. And I think for them, it's what I even see now. People are like, well, I didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to make you think about it if you weren't thinking about it. All the things we say about grief, loss. I've seen so many psychologists weigh in. At the time of this recording, we're handling the fires in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
You know, how to show up for your friends who have lost things. And there are so many universal things that can be said. The most basic of which can be, I don't know what to say, but I know that you're hurting.
Yeah.
And there was just no one really who could say that to me. It was really surprising. Of course, my mother was a pillar, as she always is for me, but even for her, there's skin in the game for her. So of course she was, and she's a therapist. So she tried to keep the mom hat on and the therapist hat off. But it was just as upsetting for her when I was going through all of this pain, which honestly is part of why I chose my coaching path, because sometimes your mom's a pillar, your best friend's a pillar, but you need that objective person that can be your support person. I think now I've found so many people coming out and sharing their infertility stories have allowed for us to ask, what is the best way to show up for our friends? Thank you. And I should shout out that there were a couple people that were incredible.
I'm sure.
They knew I was having a miscarriage, and like dinner would show up at my door without me saying anything, or, you know, little things here and there. But the grief felt so heavy every day. I felt like I felt guilty putting that on somebody else. And I felt like nobody else could carry it with me. And my partner and I, my husband, Isaac, I mean, I see infertility ravage relationships, and I completely understand why. For us, while there were some deep lows, I think ultimately it strengthened us tremendously. So he was probably my biggest pillar, but like he needed a pillar too. And I couldn't be that pillar for him because I was going through my own stuff.
Yeah.
So it's extremely complicated, you know?
Yeah, to say the least. I mean, hearing you, I think about a couple of things. I think about, as you said, like this sense of isolation that fertility or an infertility can create, where you feel kind of alone and othered. You know, every time you go onto social media, there's another friend who's posting an announcement, another gender reveal, etc., and feeling like, when is that going to be my story? Like, and do they even get it? But also recognizing, and sometimes that is the privilege of my job, but also the humbling part is that there are so many people who are sharing those posts that maybe had their own, years long journey that haven't been shared. Yes. And how do we kind of make that shift of, yes, there's so much joy to celebrate. Absolutely. Creating that space so that there's more realistic conversations about what is unfortunately pretty common, right? With things like pregnancy losses, the need for fertility care. Those are things, especially in the area I work in the Bay Area, we have a lot of, driven, high career, professional women who choose very appropriately to delay the start of the family. But we also know that fertility rates, they change as we age gracefully, but those are real numbers biologically. And these are things that are kind of more and more prevalent, and creating space for that. Again, conversations that we're having right now, conversations that you have probably many, many times over on your own podcast are so important. What do you think are the really tangible ways to make an experience like this not so isolating, and create more space for people to hear their truths?
I don't think anyone owes us anything in terms of social media, but thank you. And they don't. No, everyone has the right to share their journey however they choose. I find it so incredibly powerful. I hate the celebrity culture that we do whatever celebrities do. However, when a celebrity can come out and say, I find often they come out once they have good news. They don't necessarily say along the way that they're struggling, but they'll make a pregnancy announcement and say, for anyone suffering, this road was not a straight line. Or you might see X, but what really happened was ABC. And just those little sentences, I think, can be so powerful for us to read them. Unfortunately, whether you're pro or con celebrity culture, it just is what it is. And so I think that it's really helpful when celebrities can come out and say that. And I think, being truthful with yourself and allowing yourself to feel it, to heal it is what I usually say. I think so many times we don't want to be a burden to our support people. We don't want to feel needy sometimes, especially like you're saying, those type A career women who, yeah, I know. It was me too. We don't want to feel needy. And there's a difference between being needy and needing support. And if we can just be very clear as a culture and as a society that support is good, asking for help can be a sign of strength, right? You don't want to deplete yourself. I think that's sort of the key to making it through these really hard times, specifically in fertility.
Yeah. Very, very powerful words. And we reflected on how important, pulling yourself out of isolation as much as you can. Because again, when you're in the trenches and you really are feeling emotionally depleted and exhausted, that's not easy. And so hopefully having people in your life to kind of send out that life vest or life raft is helpful. Yeah. What were some other unexpected lessons that you learned through your 6-year journey?
I learned that I don't consider myself a patient person. And sometimes, let me preface, I always knew I was not a patient person. But sometimes the lesson is that whether you're patient or impatient, you don't have a choice. And this is you just have to be patient. And there were times I could make peace with that, and times that was like the source of all of my anger and frustration. I learned that you have got to advocate for yourself. I think you probably know this better than anyone in the OBGYN field, as a woman especially. The amount of really caring doctors I see out there, fertility specific, because that's who I'm dealing with, who give you access to them, which they don't have to, but they do, right? Like direct access, who really are thorough and go through every bit of information in your past and your history. And still you don't get an answer about something for 2 or 3 days, let's say.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I know how crazy the physician life is, but this is life or death to your clients, literally. And so I have clients who will be like, well, I know, but they're probably really busy, so I don't want to bother them again. Meanwhile, they're like losing sleep at night, can't eat. And, I'm like, the worst thing is you bother them. You might as well try if they've given you access, right? So those little pieces of advocacy, it's crazy how I have like super successful lawyers in the world, and they're too scared to call their doctor and ask one more time because they didn't get an answer. And I'll see even from those, and that's, by the way, best case scenario. Then there's clinics and doctors where that you don't have such close proximity or access to your care team. But I'm thinking specifically of something that happened this week where I nudged a client to nudge her doctor, and the doctor was like, oh my God, I feel terrible. You sent me this text 2 days ago and I completely thought that I wrote you back. They're human and they just don't know sometimes. And if you need sometimes that voice to say, yes, I'm pushing you, go do this. It's okay. Even if you annoy your doctor, it's okay. This is your life, your money, your journey, your baby that we're talking about. Like, just do what is going to make you feel as in control as possible of a very out of control situation. And sometimes it is that little voice or nudge or call or text or whatever it might be. But advocacy is so important. And I did not understand that until I went through it myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hearing you, I have this little bit of guilt, if you will, because I am a physician, and I appreciate you prefacing that, yes, we're really busy and we have call schedules and we're caring for hundreds of patients at the same time. But sometimes that nudge is really important, because I say this all the time. The most humbling thing about my job is I'm a human that has the honor of caring for other humans. I am imperfect, right? I am just a mere mortal as well. And so sometimes I do forget to send that message or respond to that thing, or, oh yeah, I had that on my list of to-dos, but I just thought I could do it in a couple of days, but for this person, they need it now. It can make a big difference. And I think that, so many themes in my podcast thus far, and I'm sure with yours, is self-advocacy, empowerment, right? Agency and having choice, and like creating a semblance of locus control. Because, with the LA fires now and all the other things that happen in our world, we all know we can't control that much.
Yeah.
But the little control that we can exert in our lives gives us strength, gives us resilience. It's really important.
Yeah.
Very selfishly, I ask you, Abbe, again, as a physician and knowing how imperfect our healthcare system is, what are things that us physicians can do better, right? Besides being as available as possible and responding to things in a timely fashion, anything else in your experience that you want to give us feedback on?
I love that question. A couple of things come to mind. In the infertility space, and this is not on you, however, OBGYNs could be more helpful in this arena. Like, I get so many people that literally don't know what to even go for, what to ask for. I think there's sometimes, I wish people got me as they were moving from OBGYN to reproductive endocrinologist. Usually by the time they come to me, they're deep in it already. They've had a loss. Maybe they've tried treatment. We work together a little. I get to know something about them. And I'm like, I don't feel like you're at the right clinic, because every clinic has its own personality, just like every doctor has their own personality. And you think you're going to start the process, have your first round of treatment, get your baby and move on. But sometimes you don't realize that you might be dealing with this clinic or this office or this doctor every day for several months or years. And we don't want to think that way. It doesn't mean you're thinking negatively and dooming your journey, but thinking about, and I wish OBGYNs would say this as they refer reproductive endocrinologists, do you care about bedside manner? Some people do, some people don't. Do you care if a nurse calls you with bad news, or do you only want the doctor to call you with bad news? These are little things that really impact the journey from the patient perspective that I wish more people just talked about or took into consideration. And then, this is certainly not your responsibility, but one of my biggest gripes, I would say, is care of the nurse team. And I believe so strongly in our nurses. They are the unsung heroes of the medical world, like, for sure. Live for them, love them. They are part of the village that got me to my baby, to my birth, to my kids being healthy, but they're burnt out and exhausted too. And we don't have a good system in place to triage that. I think they sometimes deliver not great news in a not great way because they're at the end of their rope for the day, or they're sick of hearing from somebody. And sensitivity training is huge, and empathy training, empathic beings, like that should be required in part of the nurse's upbringing in terms of their rising to, I don't know what you call it within the nurse hierarchy, but like as they're coming up as nurses, I think some are incredibly empathetic and kind, and some just are not. Sometimes I just want to be like, go be a nurse in a different field if you don't want to be empathetic, because the infertility field, there's not a lot of room for that, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, like I've often, I mean, I'm so busy always, like all of us, but in a dream world, I would also go into clinics and bring in some nurse training, even support groups for nurses who feel frustrated by some of the calls they get. Like, how could we work together to troubleshoot those better? But you know, we only have so much time and money and all the things, but like that is something that I wish could be overhauled, is like the nursing system and how it comes out, how it rolls out, especially with portals. I don't know if you guys use a portal, but you know, everyone feels like, well, now we have a portal. You can reach anyone anytime, but you still have to communicate effectively through the portal. It's kind of, you know, so yes, as you can see, I could go on a soapbox about this, but that's one thing that I think needs a lot of help.
Please do, girl.
Yeah.
I'm always inspired by someone who not only can identify the problem, but start thinking about solutions. And you have plenty of time. You have decades to go. When those twins go to college, that's your time, one time. But no, I love it. And I also appreciate you recognizing, like the importance of ancillary support. So nurses, social workers, my mom was a social worker. So shout outs to social workers, but these unsung heroes that really are like the bedrock that helps a lot of these like healthcare systems and care teams and clinics function well. But burnout is real. You oftentimes read a lot of articles about physician burnout and clinician burnout, but those nurses get burnout too. And probably in one day, they're triaging actually thousands of messages so that the clinician only sees a handful that they really need to deal with. And eventually the nurses like, I said the same thing again and again and again. Eventually they hit their wall. And so there is an onus on not only addressing that burnout, but also, as you said, kind of reinforcing empathy, and with whether it's through training or kind of sessions with, again, people like you. There's so many great ideas.
Yes.
So many great ideas. Thinking more about kind of how you approach the support of your clients. How has your own journey, and you now being a mom of two probably wonderful human beings, how has that influenced your support of others?
I think that somebody said to me last week, oh God, it was a client. I don't remember how she said it, but basically this journey is not for the faint of heart, and you don't know it until you're deep in the trenches of it. And that is, I think, the epitome of the infertility experience. And so I think being able to reflect that, if somebody could have just reflected that for me when I was going through it, because I felt, like I said, isolated, abnormal, wrong, weird, other. I couldn't imagine anyone had ever gone through anything as horrible as I did. And they did. And I just didn't know about it. So if I could have had somebody holding my hand through that, and to be honest, I ended up switching clinics because I ended up choosing a doctor who had been through infertility herself. And that made me feel so much better immediately. And my first doctor was incredible, but it was a man, and it was, you know, he had a very different experience. And going to a woman who had been through infertility really changed the game for me in terms of her approach and how we looked at things. And so not everybody can do that, which is why there are people like me and fertility therapists, and there's a whole village of people out there who have gone through it and can say, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what that feels like, and reflect that back. I think it's just kind of a breath of fresh air to know that somebody's walked that path before and really knows. That's why I say in my bio, like someone who's been there literally everywhere, because between loss and ectopic and termination and multiple clinics, there's pretty much nothing you can bring me that I'm going to be like, oh, I can't imagine what that feels like. I can, because I've been through some version of it. And I think that if we can hold each other's hands and say, look, I've been on this path before, come with me, let's do it together. It changes everything for my clients. So that's really what I aim to bring to each of my relationships with my clients.
Yeah, that's beautiful. No, I think about it myself, right? That I walk into most of my patients' room with my privilege of being a doctor and having that education, but I'm still a woman. I'm still a woman of color. I still have the own things that have affected my own health journey that I choose to let in or not. But this past summer, my partner and I decided to do embryo preservation because we are on our own kind of family planning journey, and I'm going through our own periods of kind of indecision and ambivalence, but knew that it was important to us to freeze embryos just in case. And going through that process of, again, I'm a doctor, which means I do a lot more like technical surgical things on others, but injecting myself for several weeks and also being super stressed about timing. I remember there's one day that we were coming back from something and there was exact time that I had to give my injection. And I was so nervous about even though technically the physician we were working with said like, yeah, you have like an hour or two window. I was like, no, but like, what if I miss it? And that affects how many eggs we get. And again, for me, with all my knowledge, I still was freaking the F out, right?
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah. And I walked away from that. And I know I'm not perfect, but I think I approach most patients with as much empathy and compassion as I can. But I walked away from that with even more empathy, with even more compassion and understanding, especially for me as an OB. You're right that I am this liaison where I care for clients, and oftentimes if they're lucky, they're able to conceive and I get to care for them in their pregnancy. But there are a subset that I do have to refer out to fertility specialists, and then I get to see them again, right? I love bringing them back into the fold, but recognizing that person between seeing me for that, hey, yeah, all the tests I've done, nothing's abnormal, unexplained for infertility, which is really frustrating, but honestly way more common than we talk about. We can get into that. Yeah. And then sending them off and coming to see them again pregnant, that person has had more chapters to their journey, if you will, have probably had more stress and anxiety added on to their situation, where like that first appointment when I'm normally very joyful, I'm like, let's see your baby on the ultrasound. That's so excited. They probably have some trepidation and fear and anxiety, and just recognizing that.
Yes.
I think that those are all such important things.
I mean, it's like, I don't want anyone to have to go through the pain to get to the point where they feel more empathetic, but when you can, it's huge. I want to talk about, we don't have to do it now, but I want to talk about your embryo freezing journey.
Oh, yeah, we can. We can definitely talk about it at some point. Yeah. I mean, I think what's really interesting is that fertility, as you know, is like a spectrum. And so for my partner and I, we're undecided on starting a family. I think some of it too comes from like my job. I see so much.
Yes, I know.
This is me being very honest and open on the podcast, but why not? If I want people to be honest and open, I should too.
Yeah.
And so I see so much. So I have my own real life anxiety about doing this, let alone as a woman of color, because we know that the statistics are against women of color. Unfortunately, and educated women of color, we have even worse statistics in terms of birth outcome. So I have that fear. And then my husband has his own fears. And so I think together we're just like, okay, well, let's give ourselves more time. And freezing embryos was a chance to give us time.
Yeah.
And again, that's privilege though. I had information. I luckily I'm good friends with a bunch of fertility specialists in the area. I can talk to them, and get advice from them even before starting the journey. And that, again, talking to you, I recognize, gosh, how much privilege I had and how different that is to like be able to text a friend and a colleague questions beforehand, before diving into something that was unknown and uncertain of, whether it was going to be successful or not. I put that in quotes, right? Versus like diving into something with so many unknowns. It's a void, right? It's like a black void that can be full of fear and anxiety. And I at least had a light on that was guiding me, right? I'm just reflecting on that right now just makes me feel so grateful. But then again, flipping it back, how can we create light in that void for others, which I think is a good segue to InCircle.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. So tell me more about InCircle and its inception. And
sure. Yes. That's exactly it. Kind of like I said before, I had access to therapy and all the things, best case scenario. I didn't have any insurance coverage for fertility at the time. Starting in July 2025, California is fully mandated to carry it. It's complicated, as I'm sure you know, but that is something I've been fighting very hard for. So other than the financial piece, which kept us broke for several years, and I have no qualms about it, it was worth every penny. But I had everything at my fingertips. I had therapy, supportive family, great relationship, no diagnosed issue. And I was, as I mentioned, didn't feel I had the support that I needed. I didn't know what was missing. And so at that time, my husband and I, this was 2017, 2018. So before the podcast revolution that is now the world we live in, which I love. And before people were really talking about infertility, there was not the social media hype about infertility that there is now. Grabbed a recorder and sort of just started talking into it as our default therapist. And we were both in therapy. We had couples therapy, but it was like somebody would just say something that really pissed us off in the moment. And we wanted to talk about it to this person. It was kind of like that movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, where like the volleyball becomes his best friend, right? Like our recorder became our best friend. And we didn't know what was going to happen with those recordings, but it ultimately did turn into one of the first infertility podcasts out there.
Yeah.
And that is called Immaculate Conception. And it was sort of set up thinking we had been told it's pretty much never going to happen for us. And so where do you process that grief? How do you process that grief? What does life look like? So we grabbed this recorder and we taught our very intimate conversations into the recorder and some fights into the recorder and, my shots, like all the things. It was sort of documentary style of our actual journey. And then we got pregnant, which was, I'll never forget even telling our producers, they were like, what? Because they had heard our doctor say it's probably never going to happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, this podcast came out. It was a 12-episode sort of mini series that came out in 2020. The full thing came out in 2020. We already had our kids by then. But people started reaching out to me from literally everywhere when they heard that podcast. Oh my God, I thought my husband and I were going to get divorced. But now when I hear you and your husband fight like that, and I know that you stayed together, I feel like it gives us hope. People think that if you fight about things in your relationship, it must mean you chose the wrong person. But no, like we talk about for better and for worse. Sometimes you don't know the extent that the worst is going to be, but like there are ways through those foxholes together. And so putting that out there, I guess, really was the impetus for my business, because when all these women and couples started reaching out to me, I felt like there is this niche that needs to be filled, this gap of this person to hold your hand through it and to help you navigate and make hard decisions. It's very hard to trust your gut when you're going through infertility. I find you're on medication, nothing's working the way it's supposed to. You need somebody to help you like clear away the weeds and just focus on the path. Yeah. And so I wasn't sure what InCircle was going to be, but I knew for sure that I needed to go into some form of coaching other people going through it.
Yeah.
And so that's how it was born, all from that podcast originally.
Yeah. How organic, right? I know use like silly, OB analogies, but this is something that was conceived, if you will, just from like you and your partner needing a healthy way to like vent and express yourself emotionally. And then it gestated and grew into something that's so powerful and so beautiful and now far reaching.
Yes, exactly. And I never would have imagined myself in reproductive health in any way.
Yeah.
I went to drama school. I mean, yes, I have a behavioral science background and that's come in very handy.
Yeah.
But like from being an actress for a little while, I have some marketing experience, and from doing the 8 million odd jobs I was doing when I was acting, I have like event producing experience. All of those things in some way lined up in a way that made it so that I could be the voice for people who didn't want to talk about their infertility. I have no shame about it. I was like ready to scream from the hilltops what we had gone through. And, the business side of it from a marketing perspective, because I had done that for myself as an actress. And then you add that with the behavioral science piece of it. And it just was like, oh my gosh, I feel like now this is what I'm so aligned to do. And this is my calling in life. Yeah. Which is very lucky. It's like nobody ever wants to go through infertility. I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy, but oh my gosh, what a gift that I can now do this for people, Yeah.
Oh, that gave me chills. Just imagining like that you found your purpose, right?
Yes.
That born from something that could have otherwise been couched as like true tragedy and defeat. You like were triumphant. You have your miracle twins, lovely, but the fact that you're paying it forward is even more beautiful. It's so inspiring.
And look, if I had had a different outcome, I'm not sure I could have done it. I can only say that I'm doing it because I did get my happy ending. I'm not sure what my grief would have looked like if it had turned out differently.
Yeah.
But yes, it does feel very much in alignment. I'm curious, do you have a very strong reason why you became an OBGYN?
Oh, look at you. You're podcasting away on my podcast, girl. No, but it's true. I mean, I think that there's so many things that inspire us. I think for me, it tracks all the way back to health disparities. To be honest, I think that was what I was always naturally like inspired and honestly angered by in college. And I think women's health is a space that unfortunately is rampant with present health disparities. I already alluded to the fact that Black women have significantly higher mortality rates. If you add being an educated Black woman on top of that, our mortality rates are even worse. Somehow your education and having successful career somehow makes things worse for you. So I remember hearing about those things in college and really being moved of being like, how can that be? And how can I impact change? And I want to be a part of a field in medicine that will allow me to, if I can't make change on a big international, national level, that's fine. But I can do one-on-one caring for people is so important. So every person that seeks me out, either women of color or people who have felt othered in other ways, like that means I'm serving my purpose. So thank you for asking. But
yes,
yeah,
sorry, I can't help myself.
I know I came into this field really ready to fight. Like I'm a fighter. I believe in advocacy. I think this podcast was created because of my frustrations with our broken healthcare system, that I have 10 minutes per person, which isn't sufficient. 10 minutes per pregnant person, 20 minutes of your postpartum, and recognizing, no, I need to be able to talk about things that I think are important, or at least things I've heard my own patients tell me they find important. And I need to create a space where these conversations can keep going and going and going. And so much of that, going back to what you said about feeling othered or alone, like those are those things where when I'm in a room with someone and they really feel like there's no way anyone else can be experiencing what they're experiencing. That's my hope of this podcast, is being like, no, you truly aren't alone. And there are people who have been through it, and the people who have endured it, have survived it. Like, you're going to get through this too. And I hope that there are people going to hear your story, Abbe, and feel the same way, because you are truly inspiring.
Thank you. That's all I can hope for too. And so are you. I love talking to you.
Yeah, I'm having a great time so far.
Yes.
So I'd like to take a moment to tell you this is my passion project based on years of experience as an OB/GYN doctor. I aim to empower moms and moms-to-be and those in the pregnancy and postpartum care space. If you appreciate what I do, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with your friends so it can reach more people like you. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. If you have any requests, suggestions, or questions for future episodes, please email me at hello@goldenhour.fm or leave us a comment at goldenhour.fm on Instagram. Thinking back now to the people that are so lucky to work with you and your team, using your background in behavioral sciences and again, your own personal experience, how do you help clients get through kind of what can feel so emotionally overwhelming? We talked about advocacy and speaking up for yourself, but what are the other things that you kind of bring to the table for your clients?
So the way I said before, I try to help them get control of something that feels extremely out of control. Mm-hmm. I wish I could guarantee everyone that came to work with me a baby. I can't. I do guarantee that they will feel in control of this journey. And what that can look like is different for everybody. And that's the part of my job I love, is that, like, for some people, it's really handling their partner relationship during this. And for other people, they freak out about the injections and need a pep talk every time. And it really depends. But I work with people for several months at a time so that we can really create a relationship. And I get to know, what are the things that trigger them? What are the things that make them feel more calm? What are the things that will make them feel more in control or less in control? Is it helpful to bring their partner into the conversations, or do they prefer to work better by themselves? All these little things that just bring some, I have I think, good sense of humor. I try to bring some levity to the situation. If we can't laugh about it, what do we have? So bringing some levity, really saying, like, okay, this is a horrible day on your journey. It's not going to be like this forever. Let's give ourselves a pity party timeline. Today's Friday. We have until Tuesday to have a pity party. Tuesday, the pity party ends. And then what are we going to do to get back on our feet? And that can look different for everyone. Sometimes it's as simple as, like, go spend the weekend cuddled up on the couch watching your good TV, whatever it is. Every person has their thing, but really helping extract that from each person so that they can feel good, even though the process doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are big problems that arise, whether it's with your body, with your clinic, with your doctor, with your partner. Just having a sounding board to get through that piece of the process so that we can, like, my lens is always, let's get through this crap part so that we can move forward. My goal is always to keep you moving forward. That's sort of the coaching lens. Mm-hmm. So what do we need to do to move forward while also honoring whatever might be happening in the moment, whether it's sadness or fear, rage, all the things.
Yeah.
And sharing resources when and where I can. If I can, I work with clients all over the technically the world, but mostly the United States. I have a couple clients out of country, but mostly it's in the United States. If I can refer an acupuncturist, a therapist, a doula once they're finally pregnant to help ease the anxieties of going through pregnancy after infertility. I think a big part of my job is creating this network of this village to help all the people that I can. Now, I don't have connections in every part of every country, of every state, of every whatever, but where I do and when I do, I work to create really meaningful relationships with those people, even if it's just with Zoom and I've never met them, so that I can trust that my people who come to me are going to then be in good hands of people to help them on their journey, so that you feel sort of cradled all along the way from start until baby, And then sometimes I get people who either come back to me for secondary infertility.
Yeah.
Or come back to me because I eased their anxiety the first time and they want me to help them through going through it again. And it really does look different for everyone. Sometimes it's like, let's go through, they're taking 400 different supplements and it's making them crazy. And they just need somebody to say, you don't need to take any if you don't want to, or take the top 5 that I think are important, or right. It really is tailoring to each. It's giving the more than 10 minutes in the room that you wish you could give. Right.
Totally.
That's a lot of what it is. It's like, yeah. I talk about, I'm a big Dirty Dancing fan. I don't know how, I think you're younger than I am, but like I'm aging myself a little.
I know Dirty Dancing.
Okay. You know Dirty Dancing.
Yeah.
So, I always talk about like the watermelon moment. Like she finally, baby is carrying a watermelon to the big dance party where she's finally going to meet Johnny, the hottie hotter. Yeah. And she meets him and she's like, I carried a watermelon. And then he walks away and she's like, I carried a watermelon. Like, who says that? Right. That's how I felt like so many of my doctor's appointments were. I thought I was really prepared. My adrenaline was pumping and I was super excited to meet this doctor. And then I'd get in and forget to ask half the things that I even had written down on my sheet. So it's prepping for all of those appointments and then debrief right in writing. I will help write out what they need to ask. It's coming back from those appointments and debriefing together to make sure we understand everything the doctor said. Because in the moment, sometimes you don't want to say, wait, I don't really understand what that is. Or we only have 2 minutes left. So let me just get down all the other information and then I'll go back and figure it out. And you don't have time then to go back and figure it out with your doctor. So that part, I think, is a lot of gaining control of the process instead of feeling like you're flying through with your watermelon moment and forget everything that you need to say.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think about you and I think about, again, how limited I feel and constricted I feel in those 10-minute appointments. But
yes.
People like you and the networks that you've created for your clients and you're willing to share vastly reminds me that we all are a part of this village. Like that village theme comes up so much in the maternity space because it's what nature intended us to be in when we tried to conceive and birthed the baby and cared for that baby. I think talking to you gives me hope and makes me realize that even though what I do and what some of my colleagues do, even with our best intentions, we're limited. There are people and resources like you. And I'd love, you and I will message back and forth. I'd love to get a list of any resources that we can share with this episode. Something that you said, that you've alluded to a couple of times is the kind of the idea of mindset, right? Getting a sense of control in what feels like a uncontrollable situation, remembering what questions you're going to write down, debriefing afterwards. What role would you say mindset plays in this fertility journey, and how do you focus in on that?
I think it's so complicated because I see so many women really not think positive. And I put that word in quotes because it's so heavy and weighted, and we'll get more into that, but they scare the crap out of themselves that by thinking it might not work, they're going to make it not work, right? Because everyone says I have to think positive. And if I don't think it's going to work, how could it possibly work? And right. Mindset is so huge in everything we do. So of course it's huge in the fertility space. And there's going to be times where you just can't believe whatever you want to tell yourself. And you have to just honor that. It goes back to the feel it to heal it. So especially from a life coach perspective, we often ask, like, how is that thought serving you? So there's like, my last transfer failed. So this transfer is definitely not going to work. This is how I feel, right? We can't help it. It's trauma. And we live with those feelings. But sometimes you have to ask yourself, is that thought serving me? Like, no. Does that mean it's going to control whether the transfer works, the embryo transfer works or not? Also no. So if you need to feel that way and you need to think, this is hopeless and I don't think it's going to work, I give you permission to know that, like, it's not going to make it or break it and make the baby stick or not make the baby stick. And I think just taking that pressure off can be very helpful. And at the same time, what are the thoughts that might serve you better? My body is a queen, my body is built for this one way or another. I don't know if it's now, but I'm going to be a mother. No matter whatever the thoughts are that we can replace without the pressure of thinking that if we have a bad thought or we can't feel the positive piece of it, it's okay also, I think is like huge. I'll never forget when I was deeply into my journey and I had one incredible acupuncturist that went on the road with me and for a lot of it. And I was like, I just know I'm not pregnant. I know it didn't work. I know it didn't take. And she was like, okay, like that's your thought. It's just a thought.
Yeah.
You're still putting one foot in front of the other and doing everything that you, your mind, your body, your family needs you to do to make it work. And you thinking it might not work isn't going to make it work or not work. And it was like so freeing finally to hear someone say that. I think also fertility doctors, a lot of them are very conditioned to cheerlead. It's going to work. Yes, this is it. This is our one. And like, it's appreciated, but also it's a lot of pressure then on the patient, I think.
Yeah.
So just really having the awareness that mindset is a thing and that when we're sitting in the bad feelings of it and whatever we would call the negative mindset, let it be what it is. Don't try to push out of it. And then maybe once you can get some self-awareness, what are the things I could replace these thoughts with that will serve me better for right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So well said. I think about cheerleading because I'm inherently an optimist. I'm inherently like an enthusiastic, happy person. And so it is that delicate balance of trying to create some positivity, even though, that maybe is feigned, but you want to create this sense of hope, if you will.
Yes.
But also recognizing it's also just okay to feel like bad. I think I smile because I want to give my husband a little cred for that, my own personal realization. I grew up with I love my mom. She's Nigerian through and through. And part of the Nigerian culture is like, no, like we will persevere, like only think happy thoughts, like no room for sad thoughts. If you think sad thoughts, that sad thing's going to happen.
Yes.
And my husband was that first person who was just like, oh, you're sad. That's great. Be sad. Oh, you're angry? Yes, sit in that. That's totally fine. And recognizing, that's my own personal small little window of realization, but recognizing that there's a power in like being in a negative space. Like that's actually okay.
Major props to your husband. That's super helpful. Yeah.
I will give him a pat on the back. He's like, what's that? Who's that from? Like, that's Abby. Okay.
Yes,
she's
please
impressed
give it to
with
him from me. Yes.
But also thinking about those moments when I sit with patients in that space of loss, right? Either patients who've had a prolonged fertility journey, or maybe this is their first conception and they were really sure that like one and done, we're going to be so lucky. And I make that sad diagnosis on ultrasound is just creating space. Like there's nothing, I say nothing really besides just like letting them feel their feels and then meeting them where they are, because you can't force that moment. And it'd be disingenuous to say anything, but this is really sucky. Like, I'm really, really sorry for you. How can I show up for you? And that's it. That's what creating space is to me.
Totally. Honesty is always the best policy. That's just the bottom line. I think from the medical standpoint too, just knowing from my doctor that she's in it with me, it means so much. Like, this part's really sucky, but I just want you to know that I want this for you as bad as you want this for you. Like if every doctor could say that to us, what like a wrap of a hug that would feel like to me, And I think doctors are just, they often feel that way. They just don't necessarily say it,
Yeah. How this is a controversial question. Maybe not. I'm just deciding it is, but it's probably not. How do you feel about providers emoting? Like, there are times where, again, I've been caring for patients who I know have had prolonged journeys to this point. Like, they finally are pregnant. I'm so hopeful this ultrasound will give them the good news. And I make the diagnosis of a miscarriage, and I literally want to cry, but I realize this is not about me. Like, hold your tears, like just create space for them. But like, how do you feel with providers like expressing themselves?
Yeah. I mean, to me personally, I love it. I'm an umigumi. Like, of course I love it. I don't know how I would react if a doctor literally cried in the room with me. It might be a little more scary to me because it feels like their emotions are out of control, even though it's like such a natural response.
Yeah.
But But I've been pretty lucky, at least in my fertility journey. While they might not have emoted in the sense of crying, they've been very honest and open about like, this sucks. This sucks for you. I wish I could say something. And I appreciate that. I really do. And I actually know people who don't want that. And I think that's why finding you the person that's right for you can be really important. Because we don't know until usually we're in the bad parts of things that somebody does or doesn't respond the way we want them to.
Yeah.
You don't know that your doctor is going to put a wall up the minute something terrible happens until the something terrible happens. So you have to figure out if that's something that's important to you kind of ahead of time, you know?
Yeah, totally.
But in short, I'm all for emotions.
Okay, good. I appreciate that. And something you alluded to earlier in our conversation, it's circling back quite well. InCircle, I love that.
Yes, thank you.
Everything comes in play is choosing the right care team, choosing the right clinician, and thinking about what you need. Because you're right, someone might want someone who's a little bit more touchy-feely. Someone might want someone who's a little bit, I say sterile, not in a negative way, just like they get things done. Yeah, facts only, in and out of the room kind of situation. Someone wants a place where that doctor is intimately involved and available even via text. Someone's okay, again, if it's a bigger system. What questions do you ask your clients early on to help them figure out what is a quote unquote good fit for them?
I actually have a very long worksheet that I give out. I'm happy to share it with you at some point.
Yeah.
Like what to ask at your first appointment. And so I will go through this often with my clients of like, kind of like I said, do you only want basically you want to ask what the system is within the clinic that you're going to. So you might love your doctor and hate your clinic. You might love the clinic and think they're incredible. They have the best rates in the world. And that's really important to you, but your doctor has terrible bedside manner. Do you want to deal with either one of those things for the sake of the other? So like for me, loved my fertility doctor, sometimes had to wait over an hour because the clinic was, sorry, RPMG, I love you, but you were in the moment, like they were a mess and they were disorganized. And I didn't care because to me, it was worth it to get the doctor that I wanted in spite of the clinic. For some people, they have jobs, right? Managing this can feel like a full-time job. They can't wait an hour in the waiting room. They'll take the doctor with the facts for the sake of getting into the appointment and getting out of the appointment.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things we look at ahead of time and consider before making the decision.
Yeah.
Or sometimes when people come to me and they've already had a loss and they're like, I really thought my doctor was going to be there for me more and be more empathetic, and they just weren't. And it's like, well, we can switch to if you don't want to switch clinics, we can switch to a different doctor in that clinic. No, that's so uncomfortable. I would be so embarrassed. Okay. So either you'd be so embarrassed that we have to leave clinics altogether, or can you deal with that embarrassment and just think, this is my money, my body, my journey. I'm going to pick the right person for me. Yeah. So it's really like weighing those things out through a funnel to figure out what the most important things are in terms of making your choice. Things like, do you need a text number, whether it's your doctor or not? Do you need an immediate answer? Like, do you need a guarantee that you're going to get a portal response in a certain amount of time? Do you need video access for how to do shots on off hours? So all these different things that until you've gone through it, you don't know to ask. I think that's what I really assess with each individual client.
Yeah. No, I think that's incredibly powerful. And theme that has been threaded through this conversation so far is empowerment, right? And self-advocacy. I imagine going through that really thorough worksheet and like having someone ask questions to themselves they wouldn't normally even thought of, or even what you said about someone getting over the discomfort of switching to another clinician within that same group. That's totally okay, right? We're not no one's perfect. And it also means we're not a right fit for someone. And so if someone, even for me personally, sometimes I'll see patients who I cared for in one pregnancy who's being cared for by one of my other partners. I'm like, oh, great. Like, I'm glad they found a good fit. Like, all that matters is that they're being served well in the way that they deserve it. And it's not personal.
Exactly.
Maybe not all of us clinicians are emotionally mature enough to recognize it's not personal, but you still should just do what's best for yourself.
Exactly. Or maybe you aren't emotionally mature enough to deal with it, but like, that's not the patient's problem. Do you know what I mean? Like,
totally.
I mean, I don't want anybody to hurt your feelings, obviously, but I'm just saying, like, you might be hurt by it, but that's for you to deal with, not for them to deal with. And I will say, when I switched clinics from my first doctor to my second doctor, like, my first doctor could not have been more supportive. He was like, we all just want the best outcome for you. He lent me a nitrogen tank to bring my embryos to the new clinic, which I don't think I've ever heard of since then. He was like, yeah, just come, borrow it, sign it out, make sure you bring it back. No problem. We want this to be, you can drive it yourself. You don't have to pay for, I mean, he couldn't have been more wonderful and caring and supportive. And to that end, I still refer people to him all the time, even though that's not ultimately who I had success with, because I think he's an incredible doctor. So remembering that everyone wants your success is sometimes really hard. We feel like a nuisance or a nudnik or whatever it is. Nudnik is like a Yiddish word for an annoying person. But at the end of the day, they should want what's best for you. And if that means switching to a different doctor within the same clinic, it might be a little embarrassing sometimes, but it's also your journey, and like, get the results you need, you know?
Yeah. Amen, sister. Amen. Yes. I like it. Something that you said earlier that I'd love to touch on, and honestly, like as I'm talking to you, I'm like, I can talk to her for like 10 more hours, but of course we don't have that much time. But you alluded to, there's the emotional, individualistic tax of the fertility journey on the physical person who is struggling to get pregnant. But there's also that tax on the relationship. Can you speak to that? That it sounds like you and your husband found your own way to cope with it, but it sounds like you also have tried, as you've worked with clients, help them kind of understand that every fight isn't the end of a relationship.
Right.
Yeah. Let's talk about that more.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it a lot when we were talking about your husband and his allowing you to feel what you need to feel. My husband has a lot of strengths. That was not one of them. He grew up in a very, we have to think positive, always see the bright side kind of home. And that was extremely hard for me. And I didn't realize it until we were in the throes of this despair that would ever be something you'd think, oh, he's so positive. This is going to be such a great marriage, and then you need to feel crappy and he's not able to feel that with you. And that felt really hard. And I see that a lot where if it's a couple going through it, the wife will say, or the woman will say, if it's a heterosexual couple, my husband thinks I'm overreacting. My husband thinks I'm driving the doctor crazy. My husband thinks, that if I don't think it's going to work, of course it's not going to work. So goes back to that huge level of pressure that we start to feel that adds so much more stress that it makes it impossible for us to think positive anyway. Yeah. And so much like therapy, I do serve as like a safe space to be like, well, your husband's wrong, Yeah. Or like, right? I don't feel like with therapists, they would never say it that way. With me, I'm not bound by those rules of therapy as a coach. So, but we can talk about like, what does it mean to your relationship that he feels that way, and how can we make it work for you instead of against you? So look, it's really hard when you're in it to have those level-headed conversations, but I try to sort of talk them out with my clients and see if we can make some headway so that they don't feel all the pressure to think positive, or they don't feel like they're annoying their doctor. Or I can say maybe if I sense from them that they're frustrated by what their partner is saying, I can provide the opposite extreme of like, call your doctor right now. They don't care. They don't this, they don't. So that you can really figure out what works. And that she might say, no, actually that doesn't feel good. Yeah. But by having both sides presented, you can figure out which is the one that resonates for you. Yeah. Yeah. That might've been did I answer? I don't even know if that was great. Like the relationship piece of it,
No, it's great. I mean, I chuckle because you gave my husband some credit, which I'll pass forward. Yes. About creating a space for just real emotions, whether positive or negative. But I remember when we were doing our embryo freezing this past summer, and there was one injection that was like hard for me to push down. It was like, it's one of those ones that like you really have to like push on this injection needle really hard. So I had given him the privilege of doing that one for me. And he like had pulled the needle out too soon, and there was like a drop of the fluid on my skin. I was like, that's it. I was aiming for whatever work. Yeah, it's not gonna work. Like our REI had assured us that like based on the way the ultrasound was looking, I was gonna get this amount of eggs, and like now you're gonna drop me down a couple eggs. Like I freaked out, and I blamed him again in that moment because we talked about like locus of control and really just wanting to create some sense of agency. I was just so upset to see that drop on my belly. So funny. Now, of course, I've forgiven him, and he's so good at laughing. He's so good at laughing at my cray. And so he just laughed at me and said, like, I'm sorry. I understand this is stressful for you, and just gave me a moment. But anyway, You'd be surprised to know that a lot of women prefer their partners to do the shots. I don't understand that personally. Yeah. I am way too much of a control freak. I would not I could not have him do all my shots.
but a lot of women prefer to have somebody else do it, which I just think is interesting. It's very much a camp. Are you camp somebody else or camp yourself?
Yeah. And that was, I learned in that experience where I appreciated him offering, and it was starting to get more and more sore. So I was like, yeah, maybe it'll be better. But because I freaked out because he lost that one droplet, I was like, it's way better for me to only be able to blame myself. Like it doesn't make sense for me to like blame you when I know.
It's like
rationally.
Keep him out of harm's way, basically.
Yes. Like I was hormonal and irrational to begin with and freaking out about saving each droplet. So let me save our relationship. And
let me just also say for anybody listening, if a droplet gets on your belly, it's okay. I just want everybody to know that. And like, here's a doctor telling you the same just because she took it a different way. Like, you'll be fine.
But it's also a doctor saying like, your doctors are humans too. So like, again, going through it myself and being so like, I should be overly rational from what I know and still being a person freaking out about the drop on my belly. Like I walked away from that being like, crap, gosh, I can only imagine what it means to go through this. Majority of people who go through this are not clinicians, right? Are not physicians. And so I can only imagine that experience. And so again, so grateful that someone like you exists.
Thank you.
To support people through that. I'm sure you've gotten calls and texts me like, there's a droplet. I'm sure you've gotten those freak out moments. Like I was an hour late.
I've done a FaceTime on an airplane with a couple who had to get in the bathroom and do a progesterone shot in her butt before the airplane took off, and they were freaking out. I mean,
that you name stressful.
It. Yeah.
That sounds stressful. I'm sure. And so past clients, current clients, future clients of InCircle and Abbe are probably so grateful. As we wrap things up, because I seriously can take away your entire day.
I love it.
But I won't do it because you told me how busy you were to start. So I got to let you get back to it. You've given so many important insights of not only through your own fertility journey, let alone how you care for your clients now, but any kind of last pieces of advice for anyone who's either just starting a family, like not even aware of whether or not they have fertility issues, let alone someone who might be in, a year or two plus into their own fertility journey.
So for people starting, I always want to say, get everything tested right away.
Yeah.
Even if you're not planning to start a family for a couple years, I think sometimes because we think we can get pregnant in 4 seconds, no matter what, we just assume the minute we start trying, it's going to happen. And so then when it doesn't, we wait, we don't get tested right away. Eventually we get tested. We learn there might be a problem. We learn there might be something controllable. We learn, just get all the low-hanging fruit tests done the minute you know that one day you're going to want to start a family. And I wish some of those tests were just more standardized along the way. Like I wish women had AMH as part of their regular blood draw at 20, 22, 25, so that you can see what's going on with your egg count and your follicle stimulating hormone and all the things.
Yeah.
Definitely get the man checked. People don't go for that. Everyone assumes immediately it's probably the woman's problem. And so they don't get a sperm analysis done quickly enough. Get all the easy basic tests done. In fact, now there are companies where you can do them at home.
Yeah.
You can do your semen sample at home. You can send them back. There are great resources out there.
Yeah.
So again, this goes back to the empowerment. Have all the information that you can so that you get to decide what you want to do about it. Don't wait until you don't even know which information to get. And then you're 35 by then and you didn't realize and you thought you could take this supplement, but that's not enough. Give yourself as many tools as you possibly can. And then ask for help. And I mean this with, like we said before, asking for help is a sign of strength. Get a coach, get a guide. Could you, if you really needed to like train for something, a marathon, or needed to build 5 pounds of muscle in a short amount of time, could you like search a bunch of Reddit threads and watch a bunch of YouTube videos and like hopefully get there? Probably. But like, why not hire a trainer who's going to give you exactly what you need in the time frame that you need it and make you feel as good about that process as possible? This is accepted in so many other realms of life, but so much less so in the fertility space, in the prenatal space. Like we're finally starting to accept doulas and midwives as normal and lactation consultants, but it used to be shameful to ask for help in those areas.
Yeah.
Asking for help to me is such a sign of strength. So especially if you're in the throes of infertility, a year, 2 years, whatever it is, get a coach, get me, get somebody else, make sure you have a therapist, get an OBGYN like Anna, who is like empowered and empowers you and wants you to have all the resources at your fingertips. I think it's crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said. I think one of the reasons why I entered the healthcare field, you asked so thoughtfully, like why women's health, but also just healthcare in general, that I grew up playing sports, which means I always loved the team mentality.
Yes.
Like there's a really great quote from Martin Luther King. Wow, I realize I'm saying this on MLK Junior Day. So props
Perfect
to him.
timing. Wow.
But the quote is, I can't be who I ought to be unless you are who you ought to be. This idea of like, it's synergy. It's us together. I can't go where I need to go unless like you're there with me and vice versa. And so when I think about you saying how important help is and how help is not like a defeatist mentality. Help does not mean that you're weak. Help means that you're actually strong and you're courageous and you recognize that you need to depend on that village. Bring in the Abbeys and groups like InCircle, bring in that lactation consultant, that doula, that postpartum doula, bring them all in, that therapist, that physical therapist. Like we need it all. Our minds, our bodies, our souls deserve that all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfectly said.
As we wrap up, which I'm really sad to, and I just hope I can keep talking to you outside of the podcast.
Yes.
Any final words of encouragement that you'd like to share?
You know, your story doesn't end here. Whatever your story is, it doesn't end here, whatever here means to you. If you don't want it to end here, it doesn't end here. And so I think sometimes it's hard to imagine what we thought our life would look like versus what it might be looking like when those two aren't the same. Yeah. But you are still in control of making it look like whatever you want it to look like, however that happens. And sometimes it sucks. And sometimes it doesn't happen in the time frame you want it to happen in. And it doesn't happen in the way that you want it to happen. But your story doesn't end until you decide that it ends. And I think that's the biggest thing I want people to know.
I love it. Yeah. It's about empowerment. It's about belief in self and honoring yourself in whatever way you can. Abbe, I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful that, again, from your own journey, you were inspired to create something as prolific and powerful and beautiful and nurturing as InCircle. We will definitely share like the info about InCircle when the episode airs. But again, so grateful for your time. I know how busy things are.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to The Golden Hour, the podcast community where moms and moms-to-be can hear stories from other mothers and learn from top experts in pregnancy and postpartum care. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with your friends so we can reach more people like you. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. If you have any requests, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, please email me at hello@goldenhour.fm or leave us a comment at goldenhour.fm on Instagram. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Until then, stay golden.